We are live. I just hit the button.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you fine.
Excellent.
So I've got a very weird office. Like I've got
wow.
I don't know if you can see.
I'm pretty jealous.
Yeah, it's quite nice. It's good.
Yeah.
Not under the stairs.
Look, I've got a nice Christmas setup here. I just brought in.
I know. I can see you've upgraded. It's good. It's nice.
As nice as your beachside of your streaming. What do you call it? The setup is. It's not very Christmassy, is it, Sam? Let's be honest.
No, it's not. It's not. Although for the chalet, they've bought a personal Christmas tree to each chalet, which is a bit weird. But they've got one of the laws here is that you're not allowed to bring in anything that's contrary to Islam. So I'm not sure how the Christmas trees work, but apparently we get away with it on this island.
We celebrate the birth of Muhammad.
Yeah, apparently. I don't know what's going on, but
thanks be upon him.
Keep my head down. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we've got 11 people watching, and nobody has said that they can't hear us yet. So I think we're all good.
Sounds good.
This is a bit impromptu, but I thought we just, well, why not? We'll just turn up and we'll talk for a little bit. I don't want to be here too long, by the way.
No, we'll talk until you get bored.
Yeah, exactly. And all right, were you in the Maldives when the results came through?
Yeah, so I was in the Maldives. Yeah, the day before, and so I sent Sophie off to do the vote for me by proxy.
Yeah, no, I messaged you at 4 in the morning because I'd woken up because of the baby, and you see the results, and I messaged you to see if you're awake, see if you wanted to stream, but you're awake.
It was just in the morning for me. Yeah. So I'd be like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, we're Anyway, you want to start in particular about the results?
Well, maybe if we just say what happened first of all, I guess, for those who maybe don't know what happened. So Tories obviously did very well. Looks like they held their kind of same vote share from 2017, somewhere in the low 40s. Didn't have a massive increase, but Labour essentially imploded, went down about 8 points on 2017, lost many of the seats in their so-called red wall, very safe seats. So we're talking about things like Workington, Don Valley, Wrexham. So really, really bad showing for Labour, more than perhaps an amazing showing for the Tories.
Okay, I'm showing my ignorance here, but how is it possible that the Conservatives kept the same vote share and yet have painted the whole country blue at the same time? Is it just because of where votes are located? Yeah,
I guess so. Because we have these certain constituencies, it depends where the vote is concentrated, right? And the issue with Labour has always been that people are saying that they're very London-centric at the moment. I guess that's part of it.
I think that was reflected in the media coverage as well, because this result was predicted by a couple of people, but there was some nervousness the night before. The week leading up to it, there was so much in the media and in social media of sort of this pro Labour sentiment that people always say that it was obvious, it was always going to end up this way, but it was.
If you lived on Twitter, you'd have thought Labour were going to win by 20 points, right?
Yeah.
It's very sort of left-dominated environment.
That's what I was going to bring up, is this map. I really should have put it on the screen, but I'll find it. It's the breakdown of what the country would have looked like if only 18 to 24-year-olds voted.
And then over 65s as well, I think.
Yeah, so then the over 65s is, well, you can imagine it, but I just wanted to find the actual thing. Is that it here? Oh, this is okay. I'll share my screen. That'll go well, won't it? Nothing could go wrong from that. Just make sure I've got everything closed. Okay. Where's the button? Yeah, okay. How are we doing here? Can you see it?
It's coming up. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, so we've got our four maps here. Yeah, so we've got top left, 18 to 24-year-olds. You can see it's Or there's a little bit of green here, which is a bit random because is green actually? I thought that was the Green Party, but I'm hearing that's actually plaid. It would be good if I could zoom in enough to actually see this, but it looks like it's not that kind of It's not going to get any bigger the more I zoom in. Anyway, you get the idea. Over 65s.
So top left 18 to 24,
yeah,
very, very strongly Labour, and then bottom right over 65s, very, very strongly Tory. So you've got a lot of people sort of trying to come out and go, ooh, the future is in safe hands. Labour are going to storm to victory in 20 years' time or whatever it might be. Yeah. But obviously there's a tendency for people to become more conservative when they get out of university. Yeah. They have assets that they don't want to lose. They learn more than just the moralizing that might go on in university sort of bars and university student unions. So it's always this argument that comes up, isn't it? Oh, in 20 years, it's all going to be fine. You just hear it over and over and over again every single generation. Yeah. But people tend to become more conservative as they get older. So it looks interesting, but maybe not show anything that you wouldn't expect anyway.
That's what you'd expect. I just think it's interesting that I've been hearing a lot on social media from the more normie side of things that my peers who all wanted me to vote Labour before the election, they're all quite understandably a little bit disappointed with the result, and a lot of them are saying that they expect the NHS to be sold off.
Our NHS, sorry, come on.
Our NHS. What's funny is that they're not even in agreement with. They don't even seem to be in any kind of agreement with each other about what it means to sell off the NHS. What was being talked about is the idea that America could be providing our medicines and then charging us more for them, making it more expensive. But what's actually being suggested a lot on social media is that we're not even going to have an NHS under the Tory law. They're just going to completely scrap it, despite the fact that they've not expressed any interest in doing that in any manifestos for the last 20 years or something, as far as I know.
It's always been a Labour talking point, hasn't it? They're going to destroy the NHS, but the Tories have been in charge of it for far longer than Labour over the history of it, I believe. So
that's a good point. Yeah, anyway, my point is that over 65-year-olds, they understandably, it's not their fault, but they do need a lot of care. A lot of them are very healthy, but they're, compared to your young and sprightly kind of people, the elderly, the over 65s do need a lot of care under the NHS. They benefit the most from the NHS, and yet we see them here voting for Conservatives. So they're obviously not that worried. Or maybe it's
a quite interesting point on that is Labour did much better in 2017 with a similar but not quite as radical manifesto. But one of the big things that came up in 2017 was this idea that you're going to lose your house to have to pay for dementia care, and that played really, really badly for the Tory vote. So I'm wondering if that was one of the big issues that has caused such a big difference between 2017 and 2019 in terms of policy. Obviously, there's the issue of Brexit as well, and the fact that people have got more used to dealing with Jeremy Corbyn and got more idea about what he thinks about certain issues. But I think in terms of policy, that could potentially play in if you want to talk about the NHS.
Yeah, I just saw a good comment in the chat. Someone saying the fastest way to get people to be Tory is to get them in jobs that they pay taxes.
Yeah, well,
that's pretty accurate.
Well, exactly. When I was in university, it's very nice. Go down the student union. Everyone's like, oh, more money for the poor. Everything's, really easily solved. But then when you get into the real world, you realise it's, there's not unicorns for everyone, and it's harder to solve these problems practically and on the ground. So
I was going to make a video about this soon at some point. I was thinking recently about it. It's impossible to articulate what it feels like to get a paycheck and to pay taxes, and that does it changes you just a little bit from how you are when you're a student and when your parents are paying for everything, when you're getting loans into your bank account, you're living off other people's money. When you're living off your own money, there's just it changes something. Maybe not for everyone, but there's a lot of people that does make this. Anyway, yeah. Not really relevant to the.
Well, the VAT on this island is apparently like 37.5% or something ridiculous. So I'm just not touching anything, so I can understand the high rates of tax.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's what do you call it? That's what happens when you change the taxes. It changes people's behaviour.
Yeah,
you can't just tax people through the roof.
Exactly. But the reaction to this has been actually like pretty ridiculous. So because if you look at the results, the vote shares didn't change that much. There's a lot of people who are coming out and going, look, this is the far right on the rise again in the UK. You know, it's just the same as what's going on in the United States, happened in Brazil, Hungary, all of these countries. But if you look at it, it's more of an implosion of Labour than it is people moving to the Tories. So this idea that this is, you know, the far right on the rise just doesn't really carry any water. And yet you've got people out. I think you mentioned it earlier. You've got people out in London protesting, beating up police officers and screeching, you know, that Boris is going to be some sort of Nazi lunatic. It doesn't, even from the data that we've got, it doesn't seem to hold any water.
Well, I was going to mention those protests that you just brought up. And the night after the election results were announced, some protesters took to the streets. I heard that Antifa were out. I don't know if that's, you know, I think Antifa is a bit of a broad label in the same way that alt-right is sometimes. It's like, you see some people in the streets and you go, okay, it's Antifa. Or you see like one Antifa flag and say, oh, these protesters are Antifa. I don't know. Maybe some of them were. But there was some, they said it was chaotic. It was the words that I saw used to describe it. The clash between the police officers and who were there to kind of keep the peace and the protesters. Neither of them were very organized. The protesters didn't have, you know, a place to walk to or from. They were just kind of mingling around Parliament apparently and clashing with the police wherever they met with them.
I think it's just these sort of people who just love getting out on the streets and whinging about the next progressive thing that's come along, isn't it? It's just
I think
they have infinite time to do it.
Yeah, I think when people feel upset about something, I'm not trying to demean anyone, but you know, when you feel upset about something, you want to do something. It doesn't matter if it makes a difference or not. I can understand the need to feel like something is happening, and I told you about how the day after the election, which is when they were announced, I saw a lady in my local town centre was standing in the town square holding a picket sign saying "free hugs." She was like, compared to protesting, I think that's quite a nice sentiment. She thought, you know, she was feeling quite scared about what the Tory government was going to mean for her, and she expected, you know, other people to feel the same way. And she just wanted to feel some kind of sense of connection, and that's. I think that was really sweet, actually. I think you don't really see that sort of thing on the right, do you?
No. Well, it's become it feels very much like a similar reaction that we got in 2016 with Trump, right? You had people out protesting. You've got the very famous meme of the woman sort of screaming, "No!" Now that people... I couldn't
figure out if that was a man or a woman. It's a very androgynous person in the kind of...
It wasn't androgynous. I thought it was a woman, but thinking back now, I should probably be careful. But yeah, it seems very similar. Like you say, people want to get out. It's quite reflexive. They feel stressed. They feel worried, probably because government's too big, and who's in charge is very, very important. But they want to get out. They want to, you know, express their feelings. And it's always, you know, after an election, an awkward, sensitive time. So I'm sure things will calm down and be more reasonable. But I can't say this was unexpected to see.
Yeah, I do wonder. I mean, at what point are they going to admit that it wasn't as bad as they thought it was going to be? You know, that's what I don't think they're ever. You know, we get to the end of 5 years and we get to the next election. Like, you know, what are they going to say? Oh, we were wrong. They didn't sell the NHS, or that, you know. I don't know.
No. I think these arguments have been run at every election, haven't they? It's one of these zombie arguments that just comes back, isn't it? So yeah. I think it will be. I think it'll be up and ready for the next section as well. I think the other interesting question to get at is why did this happen? Why did this happen? And it's kind of hard to know where people went from and to in terms of votes, but you can make some sort of sensible suggestions by looking at the aggregate numbers. And it looks like people weren't desperate to turn out for Boris. You know, it was a bit of a fudged campaign. He didn't go on with Andrew Neil and things like this. But it seems that people didn't turn out for Corbyn, whether that's Corbyn the man or the policies behind Labour. So it seems sensible that people moved to the Brexit Party or the Liberal Democrats when it became clear that Labour was no longer committed to Brexit. So Brexit is a big thing behind this, you know, going from 2017 to 2019. The fact that they said they were going to follow through on Brexit in 2017, and then it became pretty clear that it was either going to be, you know, very, very soft Brexit in name only or remain. And people have turned against that. So Brexit's a massive one. And Labour seem to have abandoned the working class in the north, you know, with going after these Remain seats and Remain constituencies. There was only 200 Remain constituencies out of the 650. So there's 450 Leave constituencies, and yet they targeted these Remain constituencies. It seems like a really poor policy, and it seems from the outside, it gives the idea that these politicians who are very London centric, you've got Jeremy Corbyn in Islington, people like David Lammy, people like, I think Diane Abbott's also in London. It looks like they were being very self-serving. You know, looking after London instead of looking after the rest of the country. And there was a famous video came out from the former MP, I think, in Stoke-on-Trent, saying exactly this, that it feels to a lot of people, it's been projected that London is at the heart for Labour. You know, these sort of talking, these sort of commentariat and intelligentsia in London come ahead of the rest of the country. And, you know, you've got people like Owen Jones, like Ash Sarkar, the momentum types, calling everyone who's outside of London sort of racist, xenophobic, backwards looking little Englanders. And I think there's been a real backlash against that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a big cultural rift between London and the rest of the country.
Yeah.
And it's reflected. And really, I don't really trust anything that I see anymore. It's like I don't know how many times I have to learn this lesson, but what you see coming out of, like, all of these people are London based. You know, our MPs spend a lot of time in London. The media is, you know, primarily based in London, and the culture there is just completely different to the rest of the country. So I don't think they really know what's going on. They don't know how people feel, and you know.
Well, I think they doorstepped Dominic Cummings at one point, didn't they? And literally the thing he kept saying in interviews when they were chasing him around London was, mate, get outside of the M25, get outside of the M25, get outside of the M25. And it seems that none of them were really willing to do that, either, you know, maybe physically, but certainly not emotionally and mentally. And in policy terms, it hasn't been perceived that they've been able to do so.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I did see a few, you know, the swing seats got a little bit of a attention. Obviously, you're going to, you know, high streets, interviewing people in the places where the votes would kind of matter the most. But even then, it's just hard to really gauge the public's opinion and stuff. Just, you know, getting a few interviews on the street, and then obviously that gets edited down to whatever they want you to see. I don't want to sound like a tinfoil hat, you know, conspiracy whatever, but they're going to make that TV show, you know, they're going to make the interviews as interesting as possible. So they're not going to interview the, you know, cagey people who are slightly embarrassed about voting for Brexit. Yeah,
you're going to get the loudest points that are going to usually get the most views and such. But I think there's an issue with people don't like being taken for granted as well. That, you know, Labour will calling it the red wall. You know, you can stick a donkey on with a red rosette, and people will vote for Labour in these constituencies. You know, similar feel to 2017 with Theresa May, where she took certain votes, certain areas for granted, and people don't like to be treated like their votes are taken for granted. And they've, you know, there's been this backlash against Labour at the ballot box, on top, of course, of people feeling that Labour have blocked their vote from 2016 in the, you know, in the Brexit referendum. So this Parliament versus the people, the intelligentsia against the sort of oi polloi man on the street, seems to have got through to some extent, and they've punished Labour for not following through on what they said they would do in their manifesto, which in some ways is a very positive move.
Did you want to talk a little bit about this rejoin EU movement? The idea that what's going to take us out of the EU during this 5-year period, and then as soon as they get their, you know, Labour or Lib Dem in next time, they're gonna try and rejoin. It just seems a little bit mad to me. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah. So I mean, they seem to, you know, now they seem to have accepted that Brexit's going to happen. So instead of it being, you know, remain, it's now switched to rejoin. Yeah. So we just changed the words a little bit, but kept the prefix. I think actually this is quite a dangerous time for the Tories, because they've come in. The North are going to expect, these new northern seats that have voted for them are going to expect investment, or they're going to go straight back to Labour. You know, Boris came out and thanked the North. He said that people probably had their hands quivering over the ballot paper about voting Tory, because it's hard to go from Labour to Tory. Yeah, or hard for. I thought it was very good. I thought it was a positive thing to do. And it could actually be quite scary, because when we leave the European Union, if Brexit goes badly, you know, we now have no controls from the EU. We don't have regulations from the EU. And if people decide they want proper socialism, full socialism, and they are actually behind the policies of someone like Jeremy Corbyn, and it just turns out they didn't like him as a man, or they didn't like his Brexit stats, you know, it could end up that we get full socialism now that we have that. We're now more open to that. So it's a very dangerous time. The Tories have to make a very good fist of the next sort of few years. Otherwise, you know, we could end up with the Scots going independent, Ireland reunifying, and then England trying to crawl back to the European Union, or becoming another failed socialist state. So it's a difficult time for the Tories, and they have a lot of work to do now to mitigate and make Brexit a success.
Well, it's an exciting time to be in England, I guess. Changing going on.
Very lots going on.
What Mr. Poe is afraid of is he was saying that being in the European Union, it's not a case of just being in or being out. There's a massive shade of grey of like how much we want to be involved in Europe in terms of trade regulations, and there, you know, it does seem a bit silly, the idea that we would join the EU again. But you know, it's not that silly to think we might voluntarily start entering their regulations in order to get a better trade deal or whatever. You know, it's not actually that hard to keep that close relationship with Europe, or to become close again if we wanted to in the future.
I think we want that very much on goods, don't we, and less so on services. Ability to sort of do more services industries, but I can't see us moving too desperately away. I think there's things in the withdrawal agreement about staying in rough alignment. I think there is an argument to be said that because it was 52-48, we shouldn't be going too desperately far away. And also, I don't know if Boris has got the stomach to do that. He seems to be slightly wishy-washy on it. It will be interesting to see that now that he's got such a stonking majority, whether, you know, the oven-ready deal can have a bit of garnish put on top. Now that, you know, we've seen various stories coming. Yeah, the EU are sort of a bit worried about him coming back and playing hardball, but I guess the manifesto promises to follow through with that deal that he had already. So we'll see what happens there.
We've also seen, and this is my last point, I'll let you take it after this, but I just want to know how I've seen a lot of people criticizing the first past the post election voting system as a, you know, how can this result have happened when you know, they're upset because what happens is that the Conservatives have a majority, but people who voted Labour, the sort of anti-Conservative vote was split between the Labour and Lib Dem, Greens. If they all added together, they might have got a few seats effectively. And also the Brexit Party refusing to stand in the Conservative places where the Conservatives had won previously was very beneficial for the Conservatives, but, you know, not having to split the Brexit vote effectively. Yeah,
so the Tories didn't have as big a share of the overall sort of popular vote, if you want, as many as the fraction of seats that they managed to gain, and people are unhappy about that because proportional representation based on that popular vote would have had a very different outcome. So you'd have had probably Labour as one of the biggest parties running a coalition with the Greens, the Lib Dems and the SNP. So people are saying, oh, you know, we'd have had more people to deal with the Green issue. And you know, there is a fair argument to be had that we should discuss proportional representation. You know, the constituency system means that you have more localized control. People deal with more local issues, which I like, because I I like that people know where their money's going and how efficiently it's been spent. But there is an argument for proportional representation for more globalized issues like dealing with the environment, where you need more of a consensus that's spread out at a low level across the country. And those issues probably don't get their fair share of attention when you're dealing on such a small scale. But yeah, go on.
I was going to say something, you know, just for example, you get this something like fracking, which is it's an environmental policy, but it has very local effects. So the places that are going to have the fracking might have a very different opinion about it compared to the whole country who either do or don't want fracking for environmental reasons. And you get that's to me that's why the sort of localized government is so important, is because there's these the country might think something's great, but the actual people who are going to have to deal with it, they have a different opinion.
Well, I actually find it a little bit embarrassing, people hammering on about this after the fact, because everyone knows what the system was beforehand. It seems like the similar whining that we saw in the 2016 US election. Hillary won the popular vote. Well, the electoral college is racist and we need to bin it because we didn't win, but weren't complaining when they were winning. So it seems like sour grapes. And also, the people were still whining about direct democracy for the Brexit referendum. And now the same people who are voting about winning in a constitutional democracy. So it just seems a bit disingenuous to complain about the direct democracy of the referendum in 2015 and also complain about a Tory landslide within the system that everyone knew about before they voted this time. So how would you get a mandate? You can't get it this way, and you can't get it by direct democracy. So it just feels like sour grapes and moving the goalposts.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it's still it's an interesting intellectual exercise anyway.
Yeah, well, it's just moving the goalposts around. And I think the worst part about it is we have Brexit in large part because these constituencies outside of the M25 feel that they've been disenfranchised, ignored, marginalized. And the reaction of many of these genius commentators and Ramonas is to push for a system which would give them even more of a limit on their voice. I just think it's such a tone-deaf response. And yes, I mean, a lot of it is reactive and, protect the ideology and try to say we didn't do as badly as we did. And people like Ash Sucker and Owen Jones being like, oh, it wasn't my fault, and trying to deflect attention. But I just think it's such a tone-deaf way to come out and try to cover things up.
I think that's the general tone that I've seen is a complete denial of this, of what has happened. Instead of trying, I mean, maybe it's the tune to be expecting them to learn from the mistakes, but just blaming the electorate seems to be the way that they've been taking it. Just going like, I can't believe the country's full of so many selfish, racist, homophobic.
It's just been absolutely pathetic, and it's come from a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of people who deem themselves to be extremely sort of enlightened and intelligent. People I used to work with in Cambridge, people I used to work with in CERN. Just some of the views expressed about the agency and the ability of the general man on the street. I think they've been appalling, and more than that, they're completely counterproductive. If you want to put grand plans are all well and good, you need to persuade people to vote for you first before you can do that, and they seem to be completely missing that point.
We've had a very generous super chat from TuneIn Dropout. They say, as long as Trump is in the White House, the policies coming out of Washington will be pro-Brexit. Any thoughts on that?
Probably, yeah. Get as much trade stuff done as we can while Trump's there. If he's not there next year, so
I don't know about you, but I quite like the idea of a nice, strong relationship between Boris and Trump, and I'm an Ameriphile. I think you're a little bit as well.
Oh, I'm very much an Ameriphile. I'm very, very libertarian on most things, and I feel more American pretty much every day.
Yeah, well, I love a nice city break in a European country, but I think culturally, I'd be very happy if the UK started to move into a closer relationship with the US, and if that means being best friends with Trump, then I think that would be pretty meme-worthy, at least.
Well, it's worth it for the memes, exactly. So I think Scott Morrison came out this morning and saying, we're going to do a great trade deal with Australia and stuff. So this sort of, old what do they call it now? Australia, New Zealand. What is it? ANZAC or whatever it is. You know, the Canada, Australia, New Zealand. The sort of realignment with those is full steam ahead to some extent. But on the point about people whinging about the system, the other thing they've started whinging about is media bias, and particularly social media. You know, so this idea that they only lost because fake news is swaying the elections. You know, we need to clamp down on Facebook, even though Twitter is basically just, you know, a Labour propaganda cracking machine. You know, the Express and the Mail are just making stupid voters, you know, vote against Jeremy Corbyn. I find it really, really denying the agency of just the general person on the street. I find it really, really embarrassing. And again, not conducive to convincing anyone to go back towards the left of politics in England.
But the thing I think is interesting is how, to me at least, I think social media is a lot more influential than standard media. Like reading an article in a newspaper is not nearly as effective emotionally, you know, to actually change someone's mind as somebody's friend or their grandma, or, you know, something with a million likes on Twitter. I think is going to have a lot much more effect on someone than, you know, some very well-reasoned article on a newspaper. Unfortunately, that's what's funny about people. You know, the social media skews young, and we've seen how, you know, we saw that graph just now of how young people vote. And
it's a very good point. It's a very good point.
I don't know about you, but that was definitely reflected on my social media. I don't think I saw any. I mean, my Twitter is very conservative, but my
so maybe we should be clamping down on Twitter, pushing it conservative then, because the fact that everyone under 24 is voting Labour just shows the massive bias on social media. So so it's you know, it depends how you want to look at it, but I feel as though there's a kind of very deeply authoritarian idea in this. We need to clamp down on the media, we need to clamp down on social media, we need to clamp down on the BBC as well. Seen so many conspiracy theories about how Tory the BBC is. You know, switch over to Channel 4 and just watch Steve Coogan and the lady who was interviewing Jordan Peterson made a fool of herself. Kathy Newman sort of giggling and berating half of the country and Leave voters, calling them stupid and racist. It's, you know, you don't get fairness by having every single platform and show be fair. You get fairness by having all of those voices out there to be able to be filtered and listened to. You know, I'd much rather have that multiplicity of views and have to filter through some fake news and some rubbish than get my news pre-filtered and pre-packed and pre-sanitized from the BBC or whoever else it might be.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very interesting point we could probably talk about for hours. That, like,
we could go on that.
Like the information, like, as much as some people say it's not, I think the nature of information and, you know, how well informed we are on different subjects is changing, and the way we get information is changing, and it's not as easy to control as it used to be. You know, the fake news is a real problem, and I'm not anti-free. I'm sure you all know that I'm very pro-free speech, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing something. You know, maybe not enforcing it from the law, but there's, you know, I think it's just going to keep changing, and it's something we're going to have to think about, and we can't just say it's all going to get sorted out, you know, on its own. Maybe it will.
Well, I'm happy with you know, a national broadcaster like the BBC who does a decent but imperfect job of, you know, being unbiased on all the topics. You know, I can go there. Usually I go there to get sort of the facts of what happened in a particular incident. Don't really want the opinion there. And then I go elsewhere to, you know, to try and average out over the different views of the opinion of the subject. So I don't mind having that institution that's tasked with being unbiased, and they run a lot of fake news checks and bias checks now, particularly during the election. But I don't see the need to clamp down on other voices outside of that. You know, people on the left and the right go away and go to, you know, if you want to go far left, you go to Novara. You know, if you want left-leaning news, you can go to the Guardian, to the Independent more. If you want right-leaning news, go to the Express, go to the Daily Mail. I think that sort of cancels out. And if you have that institution in the middle where you can go and say, I'm probably going to get 95% of the facts like the BBC. I think that's a nice compromise way of dealing with it.
Well, I used to think like that, and then you may recall the start of this channel was me after the James Moore document was published, and then everyone had their own article about it, and the BBC's article was pretty shocking, and they later came up with a kind of better one, like a year after all of it happened. But the idea that you can get the basic facts from a don't misconstrue me. They do a decent but imperfect job. They can always do better. I was just a bit shocked. I thought that you could, like you, I thought you could rely on them to at least report the basic facts correctly. And yet, in that case, at least, I mean, and probably in a million other cases that I'm not aware of, they just flat out made a lie about something that you could just easily check yourself. So how often would they lie about something that you can't even check? Or
that's true.
It's harder to check.
There's I mean, one thing I would say in the BBC's defense is that I think they lean quite left on things. You know, they're pandering about the wage gap, talking about the Demore thing, you know, very sort of diversity and inclusion focused. And then people will whine on the other side. Oh, you know, they're being nicer to Boris than they are to Corbyn, blah, blah, blah. So at least if they're getting attacked from both sides, they're probably not too bad. You know, imperfect, certainly potentially biased on certain topics, individual topics, but overall, hopefully not too bad. Hopefully not too bad. But yes, certain cases certainly stand out of where they've not done a particularly good job.
Yeah, well, I think, I don't want to spend too long on this. It's just, it's slightly frightening to think about how, the times that you notice are only the times when you're best informed on that particular subject are the ones that you're going to notice. But you can't be perfectly informed about everything. So there's, a bunch that you don't notice as well.
For sure.
What's next?
Well, so the only other thing that I've got, which I think is actually really interesting, is did people reject Corbyn and Labour just because of Brexit and because of Corbyn the man? Or was it because of the policies as well? So I came out with a tweet saying it was a rejection of the left. And now I'm thinking, you've got people out there setting up this sort of folk history. You know, you got your people like Ash Sarkar, Owen Jones, Jeremy Corbyn himself this morning in The Guardian saying that they won the argument on things like austerity in the NHS. So do you think people in this country are happy with the manifesto of Labour? And if there wasn't the Brexit issue where they tried to please everyone and just ended up making a mess of it, and it wasn't Corbyn himself there, seen as an IRA sympathiser and these sort of things, and a bit doolally, do you think people would go for that manifesto platform with a more moderate face slapped on the front? That seems to be the protection and the sort of deflection that a lot of these momentum types are doing. I just wanted to get your view on that.
Yeah, I don't know. We talked about this when we looked over the manifesto. I think Jeremy Corbyn's actually quite a nice face for what I consider to be some very abhorrent policies. Yeah. Not just he's quite a handsome man. I'm not going to lie. I mean, figuratively speaking as well.
You like the silver fox.
That's not what we're into that.
A distinguished man.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think he's maybe the anti-Semitism put people off, and maybe without that he might have done a bit better. But to be honest, I think it is just the policies. It's the idea that he's a hardcore socialist, which I think is quite accurate. But it's a bit of a I want to say it's a bit of a meme. Like people, I don't know where exactly it comes from, but I think people don't trust him, and they think that they can see that he's not patriotic. He doesn't love this country, and that he's too far right, too far left, basically. But I think
there is some evidence to say that people are quite okay with the policies, right? I think they did some polling on the policies. It wasn't too bad before the election. Obviously, they did very well in 2017 with a similar, less radical manifesto. And then you see these bar charts that come out. I'll send them to you afterwards. But it says everyone who defected from Labour is saying it's the leadership and Brexit and not much on the economic policies. But I don't think you can actually separate out, as you mentioned, Jeremy Corbyn from the policies, because everyone knows that it's sort of inherent to him that he's a hardcore socialist, that he wants this nationalisation, that he'll probably want to go further down the line. So I think when people say they're rejecting Jeremy Corbyn, I think inherent in that is a rejection probably of the policies, because everyone knows what he stands for. So it's hard to disentangle the two and know which one it is. But obviously people, you know, like your Owen Joneses and stuff are going to try to defend themselves and try and defend the ideology and close ranks and say, you know, we didn't do too bad, it wasn't my fault, let's just keep going with the zealotry. But it is interesting to consider that some of the policies might still be quite popular, and a little bit worrying, as I said, if you go out of the EU, that we could end up as you know, going down some of these quite hard socialized routes.
Yeah, to be honest, I wish I knew more about what people really think, because something like nationalizing the, you know, the railways, you know, nationalizing this and that, I really don't know what the, you know, your typical either Labour voter, you know, sort of centrist kind of whatever, your undecided voter, what do they think about nationalizing things? Because not everybody's read Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. Like, you know, people don't really get an economics education about what it really, you know, about market effects and what it means for the government to run something rather than it.
Well,
it
I think some of the polling, I think some of the polling on these issues before the election was quite positive. The problem is when you package it all together, people might say, "Oh, I like nationalisation. Oh, I like taxing billionaires more," as an abstract concept. But then when it's all packaged together, there's an interaction between the policies. Then they might not like it as a package. And also, I think they might like the idea in the abstract, but not believe that it can be delivered in practical terms. So one example, the Andrew Neil interview with Jeremy Corbyn, he got onto the WASPy women paying for their pensions. And Andrew Neil was like, "How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it?" And all Jeremy Corbyn kept saying was, "We'll pay for it because it needs to be paid for. It's a moral debt."
Yeah.
So I think that really hurt him, because it looked like the Labour platform was more an ideological platform of "we'll make it work because it has to work," than a practical platform. So people will say, "Oh, you know, I like these ideas. I like the ideas of getting money off billionaires," but they don't necessarily agree that in practical terms it will be deliverable. You know, everyone would love a unicorn, but sadly they don't exist. Maybe that's the problem, that people will say they like these policies, but when they get in a voting booth, they just don't believe that it's deliverable. Yeah,
well, it's the same as it's that young old dichotomy again. People who run their own household, who pay for their own stuff, they have like a knee-jerk reaction to something that sounds expensive. Their initial reaction is, "Well, how are you going to pay for it?" You know, that's what they're concerned with. They understand that paying for something means you can't pay for something else. So when they hit it sounds too good to be true. Offering all of this free stuff and nationalize this, you know, all of that. It just sounds like, I don't think you can afford that. They don't even have to see the numbers, or, you know, about taxing. Labour promised they'd only tax people earning over 80,000 a year, but people just don't believe it. Yeah,
well, that didn't look good as well. It looked self-serving again, because all the MPs are on somebody was posting it's all they're on 79.9k or whatever. So it looked, again, it was able to be looked at as self-serving, and also when you circumscribe you know, the rich like that, it looks like you're penalizing success. It looks like you're going after a small group. It didn't really play with the for the many, not the few mantra, in my opinion. So, you know, and their idea to be with minorities. So I thought it was an awkward campaign. Have you noticed that some sort of like tropical storm has drifted in behind me? Like, I might just get blown away in a minute.
All right. Well, hang in there as long as you can. Or
No, I'm fine.
Okay. I was just going to say you know, the working class is always shrinking in the modern economy, and the middle class is always growing. So I think that for the many, not the few, is kind of, it sounds like quite an old-fashioned way of saying, like, "Oh, we're for the working man, we're for the little guy," but the fact is that most people in the UK who are working now have a pretty nice, disposable income, and they don't want to see that get taxed away. I think there aren't that many households who identify as like the working class, so it's not, they don't really feel like the many; they feel like the few.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Ironically.
I found it a very awkward thing. And you were saying about the anti-Semitism. I just in the campaign, I don't think he handled that very well at all. You've just got to keep saying sorry. And in that interview with Andrew Neil, he really didn't handle it well.
He in a later interview he kind of gave I can't remember exactly what he worded. He gave a kind of apology. Maybe that was because of the blowback from the Andrew Neil thing, but he gave some kind of apology in a later interview, but it was kind of too late by then. There's a problem with apologies.
I think the problem with the anti-Semitism thing is, as we've sort of discussed before, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn wakes up in the morning. In fact, I'm almost certain he doesn't wake up in the morning and go, I hate the Jews. Because he seems like a genuinely nice person who cares about people. Yeah. The problem is, the way that he does politics is by circumscribing groups and believing that there's some sort of, power struggle between groups of people based on, race or wealth or whatever it might be. So it ends up sort of sanctioning that sort of tribal group style politics from the very top down and into the party. And, it's followed through by these momentum times. So this is the reason why I feel there's such an issue with anti-Semitism in Labour. It's because they set up this idea of groups being against one another. So, of course, if Jewish people are seen to be, on average, more educated or on average more wealthy, it's going to cause problems relative to other groups. I think it's the style of doing politics that Jeremy Corbyn brings to the table, which causes the problem there, and which has emboldened people who actually are quite nasty about these issues and maybe are quite actually have these disgusting views more broadly, being specifically against Jews, have been emboldened in the party to say some horrible things and act in horrible ways.
Yeah.
It's left-wing anti-Semitism, right? Rather than your right-wing, I just hate the Jews and I'm a Nazi anti-Semitism.
Yeah, that's one thing you can say for the left. I don't think they I honestly believe that they're not really anti-Semitic. They don't actually hate they genuinely aren't racist. They don't hate people just because of their ethnicity. Yeah. They don't believe in ethnicity being a good indicator of any kind of personality or behavior or whatever. And I believe Jeremy Corbyn.
You say that, but then we see essentially diversity of thought being swept aside for diversity of identity. So to some extent, it creeps into that sort of thing. But I don't think, as you say, I just think they don't see it as racism rather than going out to specifically be racist. If that makes sense.
I should have really shared it on Twitter. I saw a really good video. It was a kind of classic setup, like the guy interviewing Labour activists in the street, asking them, "Is this and that thing anti-Semitic?" Saying that it was Boris Johnson who was doing the anti-Semitic things, and then he switches the script and says, "Actually, this is Jeremy Corbyn." And obviously, they act embarrassed and they backpedal, whatever. But they
and then they try and reason it. They do the Haidt thing, don't they? The Jonathan Haidt thing of trying to reason their way out of it like a lawyer. So
you can see their brain kind of doing the
mental backflips, doing the religious style mental gymnastics. Yeah.
So that was usually that kind of setup is quite amusing, seeing people do that. But in this situation, this is the first time I've seen it actually turn quite nasty. Like I was surprised at how anti-Semitic they did sound after. They a few of them came out with things like, "Oh, well, the Jews are." They do hoard their wealth, and probably because they're worried about being taxed, or it was like.
But this is the thing, isn't it? I think they don't hate the Jews, but if they have more money or more influence, or on average, of course, I don't want to fall into stereotypes myself, but I think that's where the problems come in. That they use these lazy tropes because they're so used to talking in terms of groups being at war with one another. So them falling into that sort of rhetoric is just too easy to do. I might have to get off because my computer's getting a bit swamped by the old storm here.
You're sounding a little bit windy as well. It's not too bad.
It's coming in.
You need to get one of those socks over your at least a big fluffy thing over your microphone.
Yeah.
We've got. I don't want to go much longer than an hour, so I don't know if you for the next 10 minutes you got any point to.
Do you mind if I just? Is it okay if I just move inside because I'm getting?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll stall for time. If we got any more, how are we doing in the chat today? We've got a few people here. Oh, we're going upside down. This is exciting.
I'm nearly finished. So I'm nearly finished. 5-10 minutes.
I don't feel quite so jealous about you being on a beautiful beach. It doesn't look that great, to be honest. It kind of looks windy and rainy.
Get blown away. It's terrible. What's this about?
Yeah, very nice. What the hell's going? Yeah, we. Has anyone in the chat got a topic they wanted us to cover before we go in a couple of minutes on the new? I've just been just looking at the 2015 election.
Sure. I thought I'd been incredibly smart and was just under the awning, but the wind's so strong that it's still blowing the water.
Wow. Well, you mean that water off the ocean is being blown into the water from below, not from above? Oh, you can't hear me. I've got headphones in.
Yeah.
Just bad mouthing you while you've been gone.
That's fine. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. Perfect. I was reading the chat. Someone in the chat has admitted to voting green. Say bold in this kind of voted green.
Green.
Yeah.
That's all right. It's all right. Greta will be happy.
I can picture her, but I can't remember what she's called.
What? Caroline Lucas? No, she's not. Is she the leader now?
Co-leader.
Is she the co-leader? I don't know. They always have 4 leaders, don't they?
Yeah.
Is it Jonathan Bartley?
That was
Caroline Lucas.
The Green Party is actually quite interesting because environmentalism has been this huge thing lately, especially after the Greta Thunberg and just the last few months. She was talking in the UN, and she's been a massive deal, basically. People have been, I feel like people have been getting into the spirit of environmentalism because of that, and yet the Green Party have been left on the sidelines. They're barely even discussed, really.
Well, this is one of the reasons people were complaining about the first past the post, wasn't it? Because there seems to be, a low level generalized acceptance that environment is a very important issue, but it's more of a national and globalized issue than it is a local concern, as you said with the fracking. So because of the way the system works, the Green Party have a horrifically high vote share for the fraction of seats that they got, which is 0 or 1 or something. So this is why people are complaining for proportional representation, because some of these bigger, more globalized issues don't see time of day because the system that we have in terms of the constituencies focuses on localized concerns. And I can kind of see that issue, but I guess what you need is, the national government to whip people into line on a certain issue. It's not like the Tories have got this 2050 target, which isn't unreasonable and is still going to cost a hell of a lot of money. So you can still do these globalized things within the current system, but obviously people are getting quite zealot about the environment at the moment. So if they could have seen 12 Green Party MPs in, they'd have been very, very hyped for that.
Yeah, although it's without actually winning, there's not much the Green Party can do other than block the Conservatives in Parliament. They're not, just because they've got, if they had 12 seats or even 20 seats, it's not like they could ban petrol cars or something.
Well, that seemed to be their big focus, wasn't it? Before the election was, didn't they go into a pact with? They go into a pact with Labour. They certainly went into a pact with Plaid and things like. Yeah, so I think they were more, and they were talking a lot about sort of tactical voting and things like this, wasn't it? So they know they're never going to get that many seats, but they certainly wanted to block Tories, and it was sort of block Boris was their sort of watch phrase. So yes, I think you're right. They wanted to have more impact by being sort of blocking and destructive and paving the way for this sort of progressive alliance, if you will. Than they wanted to be actually winning a ton of seats, which I think they realised was kind of out of reach.
Yeah, I think it's they're probably more powerful not in the number of seats they actually get, but the number of votes they take from whichever party is trying to is close to winning. So they can be the kingmaker. As we they're not quite even that status at the moment, because although people do care about the environment, or at least they say they do, they care about our NHS, and they want. It's not just about blocking the Tories. They care about voting Labour and securing the NHS and all these other things. It's funny how environmentalism is always framed by the Greta Thunbergs of the world as being the most important issue. I mean, it's the future of the human race. What could possibly be more important? And people will nod along and agree with that. And yet, when it comes down to blocking the Conservatives, suddenly they'll vote Labour because blocking the Conservatives is more important. Yeah.
Well, I also think this is. I think Greta's run into a bit of trouble with. She put out some blog posts the other week, and she started going on about, growth and the patriarchy has led us here, and these institutionalized systems set up by males and all this sort of nonsense. Yeah. And I really think with environmentalism, it really needs to try and stay out as much as it can from the other political issues. Because I think otherwise the science gets sort of muddied with politics. As much as it can stay on the science and keep saying, look, guys, you still need to do something. I think that works better. I think once it becomes so politicized, very easy for people who don't want to act, people who think it's all a con, a socialist land grab, to have an easy out, an easy psychological out to do nothing. So when I see Caroline Lucas up whining about Boris and whining about patriarchy and whining about feminism, I think it muddies the message of environmentalism, and I think it's something they need to think about.
Yeah, well, I think we'll definitely have to do a stream just about environmentalism at some point. But just to bring it all the way around, did you see that? I think it was they dug it up from a while ago. Boris Johnson saying that the motor car has it helped to emancipate women because the men were afraid of being run over.
So I saw that. I think Boris a lot of the time is joking, and he says things that he knows are going to get a reaction rather than being overtly horrid. I think it's been overplayed how awful he is. These tank top bum boys and stuff. I don't think he's homophobic, but I think he just loves a needle and an edgy comment, as I do myself. So I can understand that sort of point of view.
I just wanted to talking about environmentalism and it's like it's not all. What I'm trying to say is that even though he was making a joke of it, I think he was actually onto something important, which is that industrializing, our economy, it did help women a lot, because when the only power that you have access to is human muscle power, men have a massive advantage, and there's a lot of things that men can do that women just can't. They're smaller and they got weaker muscles. And sorry, that sounds sexist, but that's just
on average. On average,
of course. Yeah. And the fact that we now use, we can use fossil fuels, electricity, we can use other forms of power. It puts women on more of a level with men, and you can't say that environmentalism is also feminism, because there's all these interacting things. And in the third world, these things are still happening, where women are being given more power. Power in a Watts kind of sense. They literally have access to more strength than
I think
it's just their manpower.
I think there was this paper that came out, which is the sort of one of the ones that Peterson likes to cite, where you see as the country becomes more equal by some metric, some index, that the number of people, or the number of women, the fraction of women that work in sort of technical subjects, STEM subjects, goes down. And I believe the explanation that they gave for that was that women who live in these third world countries, they have to go and do these these technical subjects. They have to try and make the money, whereas you know, they have to be engineers, this type of thing. Whereas when you have a country that's very economically you know, advanced and things like this, women can choose to do what they want. They have more freedom to do what they want. Whereas in these countries that aren't as technologically and economically advanced, they have to do the jobs that are going to make them the money and actually get certain things done that need doing.
Yeah. Well, we've gone very far off topic. Not that that's a bad thing. But
no, it's okay.
I think we'll save it for another time because we've been going for an hour now, and I try not to have these really long streams that are very fashionable on YouTube. But frankly, I don't have time for them.
Yeah, well, I need to go get some dinner, and I think we're off to the gym as well. So.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
I'll go dry myself off.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. And
it's lovely talking to you.
And
thank you very much.
I'll split that super chat with you because it's the Christmas period and I'm feeling generous, and that's for you as well. And please, everybody who's watching, please go over to Sam's channel. He does a lot more political analysis as well as a lot of scientific analysis.
Cool. Yeah, I'd love to have you guys over there. It's Bad Boy of Science. Get over there and let's discuss some stuff, particularly if you disagree with what I've been saying.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the description. There isn't at the moment. I really should get better at doing that, putting a link to your
I always fail on that as well. So
if you leave a comment, Sam, in the comment section, I'll pin it to the top so that it's even easier to find, so that people just click on your lovely face when they see your comment. That'll take you straight to
I'll probably turn them away, but yeah, good. I appreciate that.
And Merry Christmas to the live chat who's been patiently watching us chatting.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you all.
All right, and I'll see you guys.
All right, talk to you in a bit. Peace.